Hello, and welcome to Come Play With Us, a spooky storytelling podcast. My name is Leila, and I'm joined by my evil twin,
Ruby. We're actually both the evil twin. We're both writers with non-writer day jobs. We believe in the power of great storytelling, so we've invited guests with the challenge of weaving a tale about real-life hauntings and paranormal activities with the sole purpose of scaring the shit out of us.
We'll rate them to see how they've done. Our ratings go a little something like this: scared shitless, some chills, and I think I'll be able to sleep tonight. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everyone's staying warm out there. We have our next story coming from me, your host, Leila, because I don't think people can tell our voices apart, so it's Leila.
I've decided that they can't.
No.
I think you guys sound very different.
And Stephanie's with us.
Yeah, that's true. That is that third voice. It was decidedly different from our voices, and that would be Stephanie.
And Stephanie does not sound like us, but also thinks we sound different, which is great. All right, so today's tale kind of made me a little queasy, so I hope you guys aren't going to be eating food anytime soon. But I got a little queasy when I was writing it, and then Paul actually at one point, because I was just plunking away, and he said, "Oh, do you want to share it with me?" And I said, "Sure." But then he got food, and I said, "I don't think I'll share it with you right now. You're eating, and it's gonna kind of gross you out." But my story today is about spontaneous human combustion.
Oh my gosh.
Kaboom.
Body horror. Stephanie, your lights are on.
Dim those lights.
Leila, you may turn your lights on, and I will keep my lights off.
It's fine. I have mine dimmed. As long as I can see, I'm good.
My little battery-powered tea light under my chin, just looking like we're at camp. We weren't allowed to do summer camp, but this is what I imagine it was like.
I'm gonna have my old lady computer glare glasses on. I want to tell you guys something creepy before I get into my story. Earlier, I was in my room and I was it was getting dark outside, so I pulled the shade down and I closed the curtains. And I was walking away and I heard this like noise that was kind of between a whisper and a hiss. And I was leaving my room and I turned around and I looked at Gizmo, who was on the bed, who is not known to hiss. She is very rare for her to, I think she's only ever hissed twice in her 6 years of life. And
well-behaved cat.
Yeah.
She's perfect.
Yeah. She hissed once because she saw people on the roof of like the opposite building. And that was weird. She'd never done that. And one time I startled her and she hissed, and that's it. And I think those happened like within months apart, and that was a long time ago.
She was trying something new. She was trying out new material.
But even she was kind of looking at me like, what? And then I looked back, and the curtain had actually slid back open.
Ooh.
And that was the scraping hiss sound I heard. And I just was like, my eyes are wide, and I looked at her, and I was like, you're on your own. I left the room. I was like, bye. Okay, so let me get into the story. The reason I picked spontaneous human combustion is because I feel like I first heard about it when I was a teenager. I think someone I think it was computer class where you used PowerPoint to tell a story, and then someone used PowerPoint to tell a story, and they used spontaneous human combustion as their topic, and they had photos of like scorch marks and in people's feet.
Oh, wait, so, were we in the same class? I think we were in the same class together. I think I remember
so.
This.
Yeah. It was really interesting. So clearly it left a mark. So anyway, so I will.
More ways than one.
I don't even know words. So I am going to jump in. Okay. So My sources are all over the internet, from parade.com to Wikipedia to Reddit. I just kind of was sourcing all over the place. Okay, so on July 2nd, 1951, a woman named Mary Hardy Reeser, who lived in St. Petersburg, Florida, was settling into her apartment for bed. Her son Richard had just visited, and she had told him she was going to take some mild sedatives before bed. That night, she took her sedatives and she fell asleep in an armchair. The next morning, her landlady, Pansy Carpenter, reported smelling smoke early in the morning hours. When she went to deliver a telegram to Mary, she started smelling that same smoke in the hallway, and there were also soot marks in the hall, which were really unusual to her. So she arrived at Mary's door and knocked, but there was no answer. So then she went and tried the doorknob, and it nearly scorched her palm. It was hot to the touch. She realized something was very wrong in Mary's apartment, and that when she was smelling the smoke and seeing the soot, clearly a fire had broken out. So she ran out of the hall and found nearby house painters and enlisted their help to break into the apartment. When they managed to get in, what they found was not just horrifying, but truly perplexing. Mary Reeser was still sitting in her armchair, but most of her had been burned to ashes. Part of her skull, which had shrunken down to the size of a teacup, and her spine remained, and oddly, the only intact part of her body was her left foot, unburnt, still in its black slipper. And yet, the rest of the apartment surrounding the chair was unaffected by fire. Even the neighbors were unaware that some fire event had taken place just on the other side of the wall. There were no burn marks on the walls or scorching. Some of the light switches had melted, but the outlets were still functioning. And there were candlesticks in the apartment that had melted, but the wicks were still upright and unburnt. And there was also a stack of newspapers next to Mary's chair that hadn't lit on fire. So the majority of the fire and the damage was to her body and the chair. It was so perplexing that the FBI was contacted to investigate by the St. Petersburg police chief. He sent them a whole box of evidence, which included the surviving shoe and bits and pieces of the scene, including carpet and what appeared to be human teeth. He also included a note that said, "We request any information or theories that could explain how a human body could be so destroyed and the fire confined to such a small area and so little damage done to the structure of the building and the furniture in the room, not even scorched or damaged by smoke." So the real speculation is that she died of spontaneous human combustion. She was later dubbed the Cinder Lady in the media because of the manner of her death. So, since the 18th century, there have been many reports of spontaneous human combustion. Usually, it's associated with alcoholism. One of the first accounts is from the late 15th century of a knight from Milan called Polonius Vorstius, who was known to drink a lot. Apparently, one night he burped out blue flames and was immediately consumed by them in front of his parents. On the evening of June 20th, 1745, the Countess Cornelia Zangari de Bandi of Cesena in Verona went to bed at a normal hour with apparently normal health. The following morning, when a maid came into the room, she found that the Countess's bed was empty, but the blankets and sheets had been moved aside as if someone had just gotten out of bed. As the maid got closer, she found a corpse on the floor just a few feet away from the bed, pretty much reduced to ashes, except for a pair of stocking legs that were untouched and a head that was halfway burnt, as in there were still some pieces of cranium and jaw. Nothing else in the room had looked like it had touched fire, and the 2 candles that did exist in the room were melted, but the wicks were unlit. There was a lamp in the room that was unharmed, but there was moisture on it. There was also a similar sooty moisture on the furniture and tapestry, and some of it had gotten into the drawers and stained the linen. And it smelled horrible. This sooty moisture residue had a terrible smell to it. And I should also mention that the Countess was known to bathe in camphorated spirits of wine before bed. So Stephanie, you're going to love this, but the myth became popularized by Charles Dickens when a character in his novel Bleak House, who also had a drinking problem, was a victim of spontaneous human combustion. Apparently, Dickens himself had done a lot of research and read older accounts of spontaneous human combustion before writing it in, so he likely read about the two accounts that I just shared. And just in the past 100 years, there have been numerous cases. In 1979, a woman named Beatrice Oxy was found charred to death in her home in Illinois. In 1980, a man named Henry Thomas was found burned to death in the living room of his house in South Wales. And again, most of his body was charred beyond recognition, along with half of the chair he'd been sitting in. But his feet and legs below the knees survived, still in trousers and with socks on.
Wait, and did any of them own a painting of a particular crying boy?
I don't know. That could be the one thing.
The link for everything.
Yeah, the crying boy is a link. And just recently, in December 2010, the death of a 76-year-old man named Michael Faraday in Galway, Ireland, was actually recorded by the coroner as spontaneous human combustion. His body was found sitting next to an open fireplace, but it was later deemed not the cause of the fire. There was so much fire damage to his body and organs that the coroner basically said there was no real apparent cause to the fire damage to his body, and they basically had to rule out any other possible explanation, such as heart failure or the fact that he suffered from type 2 diabetes. Neither of those seemed to lead to his death. So in situations like that, that's where spontaneous human combustion becomes the reason or the culprit, is when they really can't figure out how else this could have happened to the human body. So only about 200 cases of spontaneous human combustion have been documented in the past 300 years. So it is not very common. They all, however, share the same characteristics. It does not include crying boy painting. Usually the victims tend to be elderly females and are chronic alcoholics. The hands and feet usually fall off, mostly because the fire appears to ignite in the middle of the body. Hence, the outer limbs and parts of the skull usually survive while everything else turns to ash. And there is little damage to things close to the bodies. Like I mentioned, candles, stack of newspapers, the rest of the room or apartment. So while the most recent case in 2010 was one of the few modern cases that straight up said it was spontaneous human combustion, back in the 1950s, the FBI in Mary Reeser's case attributed the cause to the wick effect. So basically, Mary's sleeping pills completely knocked her out while she was smoking a cigarette. So the cigarette had likely fallen from her hands or her mouth and set fire to her clothes. The wick effect is where the person has to be fully deceased for it to happen. So she could have died in her sleep. And so when they're fully deceased and they catch on fire, if there's already some sort of tear in their skin, it makes melted fat from their bodies leak out and soak into their clothes. And basically it turns them into a giant candle, and it keeps them aflame for an extended period of time. That's why I said don't eat before and after this story. Other modern day explanations are usually that these people are obese or elderly with limited mobility, so they likely died in their sleep or they couldn't escape far when they caught on fire. And usually smoking is attributed to the cause of the fire. So there's other theories, of course, to spontaneous human combustion. And they are that if someone, for whatever reason, ingests phosphorus, it can form phosphine in their bodies, specifically in their blood, which could lead to the body becoming flammable. In a similar way, drinking too much can increase the amount of alcohol in the blood, which is also flammable, and then extreme stress can trigger the combustion. And of course, there are more fringe theories where spontaneous human combustion is attributed to poltergeist activity, though not in the way that we're thinking. It's more that it is activated in the part of us where the poltergeist originates from.
So like a pre-poltergeist.
So basically what I took that as is when you die and become a spirit, there's like a part of your spirit that then is able to enable poltergeist activity. It's basically, I believe, like an energy source. So that is kind of what it's saying, is that it's that part of our spirit that is that energy source that can later become a poltergeist, but it actually makes us burst into flames. And then there's also the theory of ball lightning, which I guess for you, Ruby, unlocks a new lightning fear. But it's a rare phenomenon associated with thunderstorms. Ball lightning can appear simultaneously with lightning ground strikes. They often move several meters per second and horizontally and are attracted to metal objects. So they're basically like a sphere of lightning or a sphere of energy. And they are usually accompanied by the smell of ozone or burning sulfur. So the theory is that ball lightning crashed into someone's home and ignited their bodies. And then, of course, that's not helped by, if they are extreme alcoholics. So whether real or not, the most commonly accepted explanation is the wick theory, that the human body's fat acts as a giant candle and the clothes are the wick that keep the flame going. But it doesn't fully make sense because these bodies that were documented were so incredibly burnt up beyond recognition, like into ashes. And for a body to be burned to ashes when cremated, it has to be burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 to 4 hours. So a long, steady, very hot fire needed to burn those bodies, but for some reason didn't burn anything else up in the surrounding vicinity. So really, there isn't any concrete ways to explain what has happened to these bodies. And for the most part, when spontaneous human combustion was ruled the reason, like it was in 2010, it's because there wasn't enough evidence to point to anything actual, realistically probable. Personally, I believe in both the wick theory and spontaneous human combustion because both would need to exist for the bodies to be found in such states. So essentially, a fire breaking out in the middle of the torso, which is then aided by the wick theory. And if that's the case, then I'm definitely steering clear of alcohol and cigarettes when I retire. The end.
I wonder if it burns within rather than outside of the body. Like, because then, and it makes sense to me in my head saying it, but like, if it's burning from within, it's turning you to ash from within, but then it won't necessarily be a fire that catches on anywhere else.
Still spontaneous.
So is it a myth? Because I've always thought of it as, it's been always spoken of as a myth, but is it like not a myth and there is scientific evidence to prove it, or is it still kind of mythical status?
So it's real. It's been documented. There's pictures, it's a real thing. But rather than spontaneous human combustion, the theory is the wick effect, which I mentioned. Someone has either drank too much or taken a sedative, either fallen asleep or died in their sleep, caught on fire by smoking, or maybe there was a candle nearby, something, and then there was a natural tear in their skin that made the fat dribble out, coat their clothes, and become basically a giant candle. That's the most that theory is the most supported right now. But again, that just means that you just burn for like a long, slow time. If you're burning like a candle, that doesn't explain why you're ashes.
If the doorknob was hot, it's because there was a fire that was burning for a while.
Mm-hmm. Again, to be reduced to ashes, it has to be a very hot fire.
Fire can get hot.
Enclosed.
Fire doesn't have a limit, right? It doesn't have a limit to how hot it can get.
There is.
There is.
Well, in an enclosed space,
you
know.
What do you think, Stephanie?
My rating or my scientific?
Your science.
I mean, the science. I'm not a scientist, but like the things that are connected make sense to me scientifically. Like, oh, they all had a lot of alcohol. There were cigarettes. There were sedative. Like, what's eerie about it is what you were saying about it. What's eerie about it is that nothing else burns. Like, if there's newspapers next to her, that's crazy that those didn't also burn. But like the effect of how and why this could happen and how the body would burn, I guess makes sense. Like that makes sense to me.
To me, it feels like it is an explosion. It's just a one-time explosion that's very hot, like the Big Bang, but with the human body. It turns you to ash, it blows off your legs and your head, and it makes doorknobs hot.
It doesn't blow off. It just gets left. They get left behind.
Okay, but it's like a poof. Yeah. And then things fall off.
You would think
but it's a hot poof.
Or maybe the thing is that maybe this happens way more often than we think. But the spark does catch the newspaper next to it. And these are the bits when it like didn't. Because that's just what's odd to me, that this would happen enough where whatever is next to it wouldn't burn.
So you're saying there's other fires that could have been caused by spontaneous combustion that aren't necessarily called that. What if it's all true crime?
What do you mean? Like there's a serial combustor?
There's a serial combustor, or like, her son was hiding in the house and he went and he burned her and then ran away.
I don't know why.
True crime. Snapped.
She has her own Wikipedia page.
She does. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of stuff that does make it hard to like go to sleep at night. You're like, am I going to combust?
Well, you have to think of the, like I said, the criteria. Usually, it is usually older women who are obese, who have alcoholism. It's just, healthy habits. You won't combust. All right. So just a reminder of our ratings. The least scary is some chills. The medium scary is the least scary
never gets it right.
No, why? I created them. The least scary is I think I'll be able to sleep tonight. The medium scary is some chills. And the most scary is scared shitless. So Stephanie, you get to go first because you're our guest.
So I'm going to go with some chills. I don't know exactly your rules, which I shouldn't admit this as having been a guest multiple times, but for like, you have to say everything. Like it was so well researched, but to me, that's what took the scariness away. Like I was like, that image of this woman just goes to sleep and then her landlord's breaking in and she's just ash and nothing else is on fire. That's horrifying. But then we get to these explanations that make logical.
It's less scary. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, they had alcohol and there's like a lot of alcohol in their system. They were chronic drinkers. They were smoking cigarettes. They were, or they bathed in alcohol like the other woman. So to me, that takes away the fear because that makes me think, well, I'm not going to spontaneously combust.
Yeah.
Good. But I was thinking when you were telling the first story, like the movie Long Legs, which I thought was really
I
cool.
haven't seen
Ruby
it.
hasn't
Don't tell
seen it
me.
yet.
This won't be a spoiler.
Okay.
But basically,
Proceeds to tell me all of it. Yeah, sorry, I'm just kidding.
it's about like a FBI agent is looking into these weird and potentially like supernatural crimes, but it's played like a FBI thriller. So you're following this FBI agent, but she has like, her own past and there's supernatural elements. And I thought this would be like, make this the sequel to that movie. Make this girl investigate spontaneous combustion, but have there be some paranormal reason or like no reason or no explanation. And I could see that it could just be like terrifying vibes. But to me, once you get to the science behind it, I'm like, well, ghosts are scarier than science to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also, there's the criteria to judging a story is totally up to you.
Well, I mean, like for telling a story, like if you had just
yeah.
phrased it and been like, and that was it, we never found other information, I would have been like, oh my God. But you had to, to go on and like,
and I struggled with that because the more research I did, the more I was like, there's some research I didn't include because I was like, it's going to take away from the creep factor,
Yeah, I actually started off scared shitless and then I went to some chills because if you would have said, yeah, like people explode, then I would be like, great, I'm going to add that as number 4 to my list of fears. There's lightning, malfunctioning elevator, exploding manholes, and now spontaneous combustion. Great.
And ball lightning.
Well, I'm purposefully not going to look up ball lightning because lightning is my number 1 fear.
It's a super rare phenomenon.
Yeah, I don't need to know that in my life. But then when you said, well, they're alcoholics, I was like, I don't drink. So I'm like the least person likely to spontaneously combust,
Yeah, but what if you bathed in wine?
Or what if I had something that had phosphorus in it accidentally? I mean, you never know. Some kind of medication. It's like Jaws. When we weren't seeing Jaws as much, we were scared of it.
And then
the shark named Jaws. And then when we finally saw the jaws, like it was rewarding, but for a while it was just a fin. Yeah.
I'll say, to kind of circle back to the story you told in the beginning, Leila, here's a perfect example of things that are very scary until you know what they are, but I think it'll full circle. I had watched a horror movie called Fourth Kind, maybe.
We've seen it.
It was a mockumentary about aliens.
Or is it like a fake documentary, right?
Right, like a fake documentary about aliens. And it was like, if you see an owl like outside your window, you were going to get abducted.
Yeah, I've seen it.
I watched this by myself in the dark, like in the middle of the night, because this is in the ye old days where it had to be returned. The DVD had to be returned to Netflix, like in the mail the next day. So I watched this movie. I'm about halfway through, and suddenly the blinds in my parents' house start shaking. And they start shaking, and they're making so much noise. And I'm like, holy shit. And then I opened the blinds, and my childhood cat had seen another cat outside and was having a meltdown on the windowsill. But like, to be watching that movie, you look out the window and then suddenly you're knocking, and just suddenly
oh my gosh.
You gotta be kidding me.
God.
Yeah, it's too perfect. Yeah, I probably would have had a heart attack or spontaneously combusted. Who knows?
That's why we just said, "Oh, were you saying anything?" I was like, "No, I was like, oh, you can do it from stress? Like, that's not great.
Yeah,
don't love that."
Yeah, I think stress was one of them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for being our guest.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your rating. I'm gonna get you next time.
When we don't get a scared shitless, it makes us want to really try hard to get that.
It makes us work even harder. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll feel the same way. Lights a fire under you.
It lights a fire, right? That's what I was saying. Like, it's okay to give out some chills here and there because it, creates urgency to scare.
It's a challenge. It's a fun challenge.
Yeah. And also, thank you so much to our listeners. We would love to hear from you. So if you'd like to reach out to us, you can email us at podcomeplayWithUs@gmail.com. And also don't forget to leave a rating and a review. If you're enjoying the pod, we'd really appreciate it. And in general, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.